Welcome to the School of Content podcast with me, Clint Malley, where you, the solopreneur, the small business owner, get to up your skill set by learning from expert content marketing teachers like our guest today, Christy Price from Christy Price Web Designs. Now, if you've got some questions about if you need a website, what kind of website do you need? Do you need a WordPress website, a Wix website, a Squarespace website? Are Squarespace websites even legit, right? Or if I'm a small business owner or a solopreneur, is this like a good option for me? Do I need to have something super fancy or high tech or have custom coded stuff, right? And then I also am super excited to talk with Christy Price because she has one of the most refreshing outlooks on business, on content marketing, on like being a solopreneur, because she is an amazing solopreneur. She has a YouTube channel, she has a blog, she has a website, she has a thriving Squarespace web design business. And so you are gonna get so much insight, you're gonna get so much clarity. It's gonna be really helpful for you in your journey, probably encouraging. So first off, Christy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Clint. I'm excited to be here.
So Christy, we talked a couple of weeks ago, and after we talked, I just left that conversation feeling so renewed. And one of the things that you talked about the most was like, so many people talk about, hey, like I need to scale myself. I need to be able to grow to multiple six figures or $1 million, or my business isn't anything. And one of the things that you were very clear about is like, yo, that hustle culture, that shit ain't for me, right? That's not what I'm about. So, maybe as we're talking about your own journey of how you started a Squarespace web design business, can you tell us how you kind of arrived to that mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a web designer for a couple of decades now, but in 2018, I really took a look at the kind of clients that I wanted to work with and spent a year building websites in all the different website builders out there. And I landed on Squarespace because it was the one platform that I could hand off a website to a client, teach them how to make simple updates on their own. And they didn't need me. They didn't need to pay a web designer to come back and make simple edits later. They could really take it and run once they had a nice established website. Yeah. So for me, it was really thinking about what I, as a business owner, love doing and what I want to spend time doing. And I think for most of us that are entrepreneurs, there's something that drew us to the thing that we're doing initially, something that we loved. And for me, it was building websites and also educating people on how to use websites themselves, how to update them, the basics of web design. And for me, those are the fun things. It's, when I wake up in the morning, it's like, I get to build a website today, or, oh, I get to work with a client on making their website better. And for me, those were the things that I loved doing. And along the way, especially after I transitioned to Squarespace and started creating content around it and started getting, SEO, funneling people to my site, then I started getting people asking, well, when are you going to scale your business? When are you going to become an agency? When are you going to hire designers and just, do the management yourself? And there was a while that I thought about that, and it just felt all kinds of wrong to me because I don't want to be a manager. I don't wake up in the morning and think, boy, I want to assign tasks to other people today. For me, it was really just thinking about what I love doing and creating and working one-on-one with people. And sure, that means that my revenue is not going to be multiple six figures. It's impossible to do that as a solopreneur web designer. But for me, what I make is enough. It's enough to have the life that I enjoy having. I work full time, but not all the time around the clock. I can take vacations. I can take a day off. And I think that work-life balance and then doing what you love is really what's important to me in my business. And I think if you are doing what you love and what you're meant to do, that shines through. And your clients have a much better experience if they're working with someone who really enjoys what they're doing as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about trades, right? So when we think about trades, we think about the person who's a shoe repairman, right? Like that's what they do, or, they're an interior decorator or whatever. Like whatever trade that they have, it's not always the knee-jerk reaction when it comes to those kinds of trades. Like, hey, how are you going to scale yourself, right? How are you going to employ more people? And I wish that digital brands could also have that same mindset, right? Like to be okay with saying, yo, if I make, $100,000 a year, I'm happy with that. Like, are you happy, right? And I was talking with a mentor of mine, Andy Crestodina, and I was telling him how I turned down this job that was offering me, $50,000, $60,000 more than the current marketing job that I have, right, with Sandstone Care. And I was like, yo, it's really hard to like think about, hey, that's a lot of money. And the thing he said to me that really stuck out was the thing about management and marketing is that the higher you go, the less you actually do, the less you actually create, right? And so many people spend so much time trying to climb that corporate ladder to where they're managing a whole bunch of people, and then they realize that they're disconnected from the reason why they got into this stuff in the first place, that they like to make art, that they like to put their effort and their soul into something. So it's so refreshing to hear you talk about, hey, like, you can just be content. That's okay too. Like, that's an option for you. That's a lane, right?
Right. And I think that there is this mindset around digital entrepreneurs that you have to scale to be successful. And I don't think that's true at all. It really has to do with how you define success. And I think Paul Jarvis did a great job about outlining that in his book, Company of One, and really thinking about what is enough for you and what you want to do. And in thinking about just in terms of scaling, you're right. And your mentor is right. You're doing less and less of the work. You're doing more management. You're moving people around. You're checking off tasks. You're double checking work. And if that's fulfilling for you, if you love managing people and you love making money, then sure, scaling is the right thing for you. But for me, I don't want to be a manager. I want to do the work that I love, which is the design work and the education work. And I think that this idea of being successful means that you've scaled to an agency it's really an idea that I think we need as digital entrepreneurs. We really need to correct that and say you don't have to scale to be successful. Maybe you have to scale to make multiple six figures, but that's not how you need to define success.
Yeah, like, are you even happy, right? I want to backtrack on some of the stuff that you're talking about in your journey because, you are a testament to the hustle behind doing the work, right? Like actually creating the blog post, writing the content. And I want to clear up some misconceptions when it comes to Squarespace, right? Because I think that there's people, at least me, like when I heard people talk about Squarespace websites, I was like, this is stupid. Like, why would you pay someone to make a Squarespace website, right? And then I worked for a digital agency. It was my first ever marketing job. And they're like, yeah, we do Squarespace web design. And I was like, really? Like, that's what one of the services you offer? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, well, how much do you charge? And they're like, about $5,000 to $7,000 per website. And I said, huh. And then how much does it cost for a WordPress website? And they're like, oh, that's like $15,000 to $25,000. And I was like, okay. So when we're thinking about Squarespace websites and how they compare to like other platforms, what are some of the misconceptions that people really don't understand? Like, or what are the misconceptions that people usually have with Squarespace?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So before I worked on Squarespace, I actually worked with WordPress. So I was a WordPress web designer, and WordPress is a great platform, and it's a great platform for a lot of people. And it can do things that, for example, if you are a food blogger, Squarespace is not for you. WordPress is where you need to be because there are specific plugins made for WordPress for food bloggers. And there are certain niches where a particular platform makes sense. But for many service-based industries, Squarespace is a great platform to get a site up at a much lower price point. As you mentioned, the price point for Squarespace websites comes in much lower than the same site developed on WordPress or Webflow because those require a lot more coding and a lot more plugins. They also require more maintenance after. So with Squarespace, not only can you get a website at a lower price point, but you don't have to pay someone to maintain it. So comparing it to WordPress, for example, WordPress is an open platform system. So you have tons of plugins that you're using on your website that everything is open source. People can access the code. So WordPress sites get hacked. And so you have to be on top of updating your site, updating your plugins every month. And I can't tell you how many WordPress sites I've cleaned up after they've been hacked. Knock on wood, I've not seen a Squarespace website hacked before. And that's because it's a closed source platform. So Squarespace is maintaining all the code. They're doing all those updates on the back end. So you as a consumer aren't having to do that on your own or pay a web designer for a maintenance plan to do that for you. So Squarespace is a great platform for anyone in a service industry, people who just want to do simple blogs, who are interested in growing their business through blogging. So I also hear Squarespace isn't great for SEO. Well, SEO has so many factors rolled into it, and most of those you can achieve on a Squarespace website. So Squarespace is not out of the game for blogging and for SEO in general. And I think one of the ideas around Squarespace that you mentioned is like, well, why would you hire someone to make a Squarespace website for you? Why wouldn't you just do it yourself? And
can I say one thing about that? Because it's so relevant to what you're about to say. So like hold that thought. So as soon as going back to that story with the agency where I was like, hey, okay, you charging $5,000 for people to do this. I was like, maybe I should learn how to do this. So they're like, yeah, like we have a Squarespace account. Go ahead, learn. It's so easy. Everyone told me how easy it was. I could not get a goddamn block to like move and add text. Like it was not easy. It was not straightforward for me. I didn't even realize there were insert points until like I had to look up some tutorials. And so it was actually a much steeper learning curve for me, like as somebody who's like tech savvy. And I realized, I need some help with this, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, tell me, going back to this question, why would you hire a designer? What's the reasoning behind that?
Right. And, Squarespace it's marketed as a DIY platform, and there are DIYers who have beautiful websites. But like you said, there is a learning curve with Squarespace. And a lot of people hire a designer for the reason that they just have more money than time. So maybe they want to just hand off the site to an expert, get it set up. And then most designers will actually do customized training for their clients. There are specific things that we know the client will be changing on the site. So we show them how to do that. And they don't have to learn the whole platform. They know how to do specific tasks that they'll need going forward. So having more money than time is one reason. Another reason is that there is so much more to a website than plugging in words and images. And this is where custom websites on Squarespace really shine, because if you hire a web designer, they're going to talk through with you in a strategy call. What's the purpose of your website? What are we trying to get people to do when they're here? And they build the site with that client journey in mind. So there's so much strategy about the path the person takes when they land on your website. The first thing that you want to do is let people know, are they in the right place? So when you go to a website and that H1 tag, that big text on the front says welcome, that is doing no one any favors. And if you're not a web designer, you may not know that. So having a web designer who knows where to put your keywords, how to create a page that keeps people moving down, how to create calls to action that take people on the path you want them to go through your site, and then to convert them from viewers to clients. That is pure gold. And that's something that can be challenging as a DIYer, even though Squarespace has some beautiful templates, free templates that you can play around with. And I would say if you're thinking about Squarespace, it's always great to set up an account and play around with it on your own and learn what you don't know. And like you said, you were playing around and it was pretty clear early on, I'm going to need some tutorials. I'm going to need some help. And so there are people whose brains work like that structure. They understand the flow chart of how a website will work. And so those people can DIY a website, no problem. They might get hung up on some of the technical aspects, but they can hire a web designer for an hour here or there for that. But other people who don't have that kind of strategic background in customer journey, it's really great for them to hand off the site to a professional from the beginning to set them up for success. And then with Squarespace, like I said before, the beautiful thing is you don't have to keep coming back to that web designer. So for example, if one of your offers changes, so perhaps you are a graphic designer and you're changing your package, you don't have to hire someone for $200-$300 to come in and update the text on your page. You can easily do that yourself. And you're not changing the flow of the site. You're not changing how people interact with it. You're just changing content. And that's so easy for people to do on Squarespace. And as a web designer, most of us don't love going in and changing text. That's not fun for us. The fun part is creating the customer journey, thinking about the strategy of the site, building a beautiful site that's easy to use. And so it's a thrill for us to be able to teach our clients how to maintain the site themselves and save them money in the long run.
Totally. And there's a bunch of things that you probably don't even know that you need to know, right? When it comes to a Squarespace website. Let's nerd out for a second. Let's just talk about some of these things. So you talked about a one-liner or the hero text when someone first lands on your page. It's like, how do you write that? Well, you need a formula for that. It's like who you help, where you help them, how you help them, and the benefit you bring, right? If you don't have somebody who's giving you a formula that's letting people know that you're in the right place, you're probably going to say something generic, right? Like helping people live their best lives, stuff that could be applied to a church or a nonprofit organization or to any other business. And so as a general rule, if your one-liner, that first sentence in the first 6 seconds that someone lands on your website doesn't clearly explain who you help, where you help them, how you help them, and the benefit you bring, then people are going to be confused and they're just going to click away, right? And then there's a myriad of other things that you didn't even know you needed. You know that little icon at the top of your tab that has a logo? Do you know what that's called? It's called a favicon, and you need to upload it, right? Should you put home in your navigation? Well, the answer is no. You should just be able to click on a logo, right? Should you have a button so people can schedule with you at the top right? Well, probably, depending on if that's your primary goal. And also, what is your primary goal? You need someone to help sort that through you. There's just what are the steps for your website? How does somebody do business with you? Have you broken it down into 3 steps? How do you display the stuff and the work that you've done? How do you use testimonials? Do you put them all on one page or do you put them throughout your site, right? These are all things that web designers have spent tons of time sorting through, learning, crafting to make sure that when you actually launch your website, that it's going to be your best foot forward. So I personally create Squarespace websites, which is how I first connected with you. You were so gracious to, meet up and talk and chat with me on my journey and help me out there. And the thing I keep seeing over and over again is hey, if you're a small business owner, if you're a service-based business, if you are a solopreneur, you're going to need something as agile for your business as you. You don't want to pay that monthly fee. You don't want to have to go to a developer to change the color of a button. You want to be able to do that stuff yourself. And you're telling us, hey, a Squarespace website is actually a great option for that. And can you help us, because you kind of hinted at this, but I just want to be crystal clear. Who is a Squarespace website not great for?
Yeah, so Squarespace websites are great for a lot of people. And this year, Squarespace, if you saw their Super Bowl ad, their new tagline this year is any everything to sell anything, something like that. So they're really leaning more into e-commerce. But I have to say, if you have a shop, so if your business is primarily e-commerce, today Squarespace is probably not the best platform for you. I would look at Shopify. It was built from the ground up to support e-commerce businesses. Now, if you do a lot of things and selling a few items, a few products is part of that, Squarespace can be great. But for primary e-commerce businesses, I would say take a look at Shopify instead. It doesn't have the design flexibility that Squarespace has, but for e-commerce businesses, it has so much on the back end that makes your life easier. That's where I would start. And I mentioned food bloggers earlier. So there are certain niches like food blogging where you do need specific plugins that are built for WordPress. So you'll notice that all the successful food bloggers out there are using WordPress, and that's why. Squarespace is really great for informational websites. So if you have a brick and mortar business, so restaurants, it's great for. If you're a service-based industry, great for you. You mentioned that earlier. You can change your offerings really easily. So Squarespace is particularly wonderful for newer businesses because it is so easily flexible. And you mentioned this earlier. I'll just go back to that. You said, you don't want to hire a developer and spend hundreds of dollars to change something when your business changes. So perhaps you want to get started quickly. You have a Squarespace website, and maybe you do start with a DIY site. Later on, you can hire a developer to come, or a Squarespace designer to come and help you and make that site even better. You can add branding easily. So if you don't start with branding and you're just starting with information, start with that. Then you can add your branding later. So one question that I often get is, when should I launch my website? And that answer is today. Even if you don't have cash to pay a Squarespace designer, even if you are DIYing, if you're not sure about the customer journey, those are things that you're not sure about, but you need a presence, go ahead and create a website, because something is better than nothing, always. And Squarespace websites, not carved in stone. It's really easy to change them. So as you learn, or as your business pivots or grows, you can update those things really easily yourself on your website. So I always say, launch before you're ready. Whenever you have an idea for a business and you get going, you do want the legitimacy of a website. You want a place where you can send people so they can get more information about what you're offering, so that you're not having hours-long conversation with everyone who might be interested. You have a one point where you can send them to find out more about your business. So always launch before you're ready. And absolutely, if DIYing is what you need to do for now, do it. But I will say, going back to what you were mentioning about working with a designer, the designer will know objectively what is the correct way to set up a website. So there are lots of subjective things in web design, and those could be your font choices. But objectively, the web designer is going to understand how to create those fonts, to select fonts and create them in a specific hierarchy so that your website's readable. And there's a lot that goes into that. So for instance, most designers don't use cursive fonts because they're really hard to read. And you mentioned the 6-second rule. So if someone can't figure out what you're offering in the first 6 seconds, they're gone. If someone is having trouble reading something, if it's taking them longer to read what you offer because it's a font that's just a little tricky, like, is that an A or an O? And they're spending time figuring it out, they're gone. So our job as web designers is to make your website as easy to digest as possible. And a friend of mine, another designer named Sarah Moon, said, your website is not an art project. And I always come back to that because I see these beautiful websites that people have created that are very on trend with the latest styles and, you'll see some really neat, like horizontal scrolling that people don't typically see, but people don't know how to use that. And as an art project, it's great. As a tool for selling your services, it can be a real challenge because you lose people because they don't know how to use the website.
Totally. And so, like, I'm going to dive in a little bit because you're talking about the stuff that I really care about. Like, let's talk about this whole formatting thing. So, just for some perspective, so somebody's like, all right, like fonts, like, is it really that big of a deal? Well, listen, if you're, when search engines are crawling your site, one of the things that they're looking for is the H1 and H2s of your site. Those are the heading ones and the heading twos to make sure that those words are connected to people's top questions. And if people can't find their top questions, or if those words don't make sense, or it's not in a way that people can digest it, then they're just going to click off. People don't like to read from one side of the screen all the way to the other. It's a cognitive burden on them. So you need to make sure that there's enough white space or spacing on the side so that people don't have to work so hard to read your stuff. And speaking of that, people don't like these big blocky paragraphs, right? I try to keep all of my paragraphs 3 lines or under, because 3 lines turns to 6 lines on mobile. And I still try to use bullets and numbered lists and bolded words and underlines to draw the reader's attention so that it makes it very easy for people to skim, because people are not really reading on websites, they're skimming and they're scrolling, right? And these are just a few of the on-page SEO or formatting user experience best practices that a designer is going to understand, and they're going to make sure that it's accessible on your site. More than being artistic, like you said, is your website clear? Does it make it simple for people to understand what you do and how you help them and the steps it takes to do business with you? Because if it doesn't, right, if it's not any of those things, then people are just going to click away. And I wanted to, you mentioned this a little bit ago. You talked about Webflow, and a friend of mine, Webflow is like another content management system. It is a website builder. And a friend of mine turned me on to this. He said, hey, it's like Squarespace, but you have even more stuff you can do. So for somebody who's like considering, between Webflow and Squarespace as like a website builder, what would you tell them?
Yeah, so if you have a background in code and you love digging into the nitty gritty, Webflow can be great for you. It certainly has more layout options than Squarespace offers today, because with Webflow, the sky is the limit. Most of the designers I know that work in Webflow have a coding background, because you do a lot of custom code in Webflow. And you can create a lot of amazing things that would be more difficult to create in Squarespace. The drawback with Webflow is that your clients often have a tougher time going in and making changes. There is more to the interface. It's not as simple as Squarespace, where it's edit, click, change the text, save. So with Squarespace, it really, the text editing at least works just like a text editor. It's a very simple to get in and out quickly. It's I think for many people, an intuitive setup. For Webflow, I think it's less intuitive for people. It's really the platform of choice if someone comes to you and they need a specific layout that is not achievable in Squarespace, or they need specific functions that aren't achievable easily in Squarespace. At some point, with Squarespace, at some point you are taking the rails off for more complex websites. So Squarespace it's a simple platform, right? They make it simple. And there are a lot of limitations to that simplicity, which I think is a beautiful thing, because when you hand off a site, it's really hard to turn it into a dumpster fire. With something like Wix or other builders that allow you so much more freedom, it's easy to make those sites become terrible, both from a user perspective or a design perspective. It's easy to do that. Squarespace keeps the rails on. At some point, though, those rails can become limitations for functionality and layout. And if you're needing to write so much custom code on top of Squarespace to create a layout or functionality that your client needs, then it's really better to just start with something like Webflow that allows for that flexibility from the get-go, and you're not just piling code on top of code.
Okay, cool. I think that's helpful for people. And one of the things that you said is that there's limitations and there's kind of some simplicity and beauty in limitations. And I want to like emphasize that point because art is about limitations, right? So when you look at a blank page, it can be very intimidating. When you look at Squarespace templates, they can also be very intimidating because most of the templates that Squarespace offers feature beautiful photos, right? That most people, just don't have, right? So you need a designer who's able to say, okay, these are the photos that you have and you don't have any more. That's okay. We're going to work around that to make that super clear, right? Like on your own website, on ChristyPrice.com, is it Christy Price Web Design or is it ChristyPrice.com?
It's ChristyPrice.com.
Okay, cool. I got it right the first time. ChristyPrice.com. There's not a ton of photos right off the bat, right? It's a lot of just making it very simple and clear. I saw this guy. He created a portrait of Bruce Lee, painted it, but he only used karate chops. And it was in the karate chopping on the canvas that allowed him to have some like creative vision and allowed his art to be unique. And so the limitations actually force you to be more creative and to help you create something that's simple and beautiful, right?
I think that comes back to what we were saying earlier about that 6 seconds that you have people's attention when they land on your site. If it is cluttered, if it's not clear where your eye should go, so that's something as web designers we think about too. It's where is your eye moving on the page? And so that's why we typically do a logo top left, the contact top right, and then there's a Z pattern that your eye makes, and it comes back down through that hero statement. So we think about things like that as we're setting it up. If you are on a platform that allows for things to be anywhere on the page, it's not helping you create a website that's easy to use. Squarespace has a handful of different header options. That's because those are all good options. You won't see things with like 3 different layers of navigation because that's not great web design. So I think there are those limitations, but I think most of them are really helpful in terms of creating a site that is easy for someone to use. And that's what you want, because you want someone to be able to use your site to get to the information that they have a question about and to contact you and work with you.
Yeah. So there's a few things that I want to point out with what you're saying. First, like, before we transition to like your content journey, like your blogging journey, because I think that's I read one of your blog posts the other day and I stopped after I read it to the end and I was like, I don't remember the last time I read a blog post to the end. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't remember like actually reading a blog post. Like, sometimes you search something in Google and you come across some content, you read a section and you're like, all right, I'm good. But like, I don't remember like from top to bottom reading a blog post like I did yours the other day. And so like, you're so skilled, you have so many awesome insights that I'm excited to talk about. But before we do that, I just wanted to point out a few things. One, Christy Price, you are a Squarespace web designer. Me, Clint Malley, I am also a Squarespace web designer. There is plenty of space for for you to be talking with other people in your industry or people that you're aspiring for. Because guess what? There's more than enough to go around, right? The other thing is that you're going to find that different web designers have different styles. That's like what makes them an artist, is that they have a style that they like. And so you're able to choose things based on preference that you feel like fit with your brand or your business's unique style. And there's also experience levels, and there's also price points, and there's all of these different things. So one, I want to encourage you as people who are like creating content to actually talk with the people within your industry, and within the people who are already moving and shaking. And if those people are like gracious enough, they're probably going to drop some wisdom on you and save you a ton of time, a ton of trouble.
I love that you are bringing up that we are what could be considered as competitors. We are both Squarespace designers. But one of the beautiful things about this community, and I think we're seeing this more in the digital world, is that people are favoring community over competition. And we are really building these groups of people to elevate one another. And Clint may come across a client who maybe he's not the right fit for. And because he knows me and he knows other Squarespace designers, he knows where to send them to get the best result for what they need. And I think we all want to do the best we can for people. And so sometimes that is recommending another designer. So I know what my style is like. So if someone comes to me and they want the trendy lines and they want lots of gradients and they want horizontal scroll, that's not me. My designs are modern and minimal, and I know what designers create like that. So I know where to send them for the kind of experience they want for their website. So I think that another point that you touched on was being able to sit and talk with other people in your space. And that is such a time saver. There are for Squarespace designers, there are Facebook groups, and I'm sure whatever industry you are in, there are groups that you can join. And to be able to reach out and say, hey, I have this edge case in this project that I'm working on. Has anyone come across this? And within 5 minutes, someone has already solved your problem instead of you spending 2 weeks investigating every possible way to solve the problem. It is a wonderful thing to be able to be a part of a community where you are helping one another. And you really all want the best end result because we are designers. We want you to have the best functioning and looking website for you and to be able to work together to do that.
And there's more than enough to go around, right? Like we don't do that with, I know I used to be in the fitness industry and people will be like, oh, this person's leaving from this. I'm like, yo, there's enough people who need fitness support. Like there's enough people who are trying to get fit. And there's different flavors for everybody. Also, real estate, right? Like if you think about it, web design is like digital real estate. You're just creating some digital real estate. And there's not a limit in space like real estate, but real estate agents still collaborate with each other. They still mentor each other. They still help and guide each other. And so, there's really not like a limit for that. Also, if I'm busy like with a client and somebody needs their website done and I don't have any availability, like I want to be able to support somebody else who would also be a good fit. So there's chances are Christy Price is like always booked up, right? Like chances are there's going to be a time where somebody needs a website done in a time frame that she doesn't have, and she needs a Rolodex of people that she can reach out to help support them, right? Like and why wouldn't she do that? She's helping somebody that she cares about. She's also helping this person who needs help. It's a win-win for everybody. So all that to say, guys, there's enough to go around.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier the differences in styles that different designers have. We also have very different processes. So for example, my process would never work for a nonprofit. So if a nonprofit approaches me, I do have that Rolodex of designers that love working with nonprofits, and I know exactly where to send them. So it really is, it's a personality fit, it's a process fit, it's a design style fit. There are a lot of things that you're looking for when you're choosing a designer for your project. And with the wonderful thing about the Squarespace community is if you reach out to a designer and they know they're not a fit, they're going to connect you with people that are.
I'm curious, why is nonprofits not something that you typically do websites for?
Yeah, so in my custom builds, I work on a 2-week sprint. So the actual build period of the site is 2 weeks. Well, before that, we have a strategy call. We've, set up processes to collect content and images, but the build itself is 2 weeks. With nonprofits, you always have multiple stakeholders, and to get people together to look at something and get approval to turn around does not work on that kind of time scale at all. So when I book projects, I book for projects with no more than 2 stakeholders.
See, okay, I can speak to exactly what you were saying, right? So with my current job at Sandstone Care as the director of marketing, we're in the middle of a website rebuild, right? And we hired a company that I know and I trust because it's a custom coded WordPress website. This website is like, has a big domain authority, thousands and thousands of pages. It's just a gigantic project. One person can't take it on. It needs like a big web design firm, right? And there's so many things that are unique to that industry with mental health and substance use that also need like custom code stuff, right? And so we literally yesterday had an hour and a half call where they presented design pages, and there are 6 to 8 of us on a call going through the copy, the images, the colors, like everything to make sure that it's that we feel strongly about it, that we're not missing any angles, that we're including everything, all of that stuff, right? So and that is a long process. So like just to revisit this, that is a months and months and months and months process. We are going on week 20, and it's probably gonna be a 40-week process. So it's like a year almost, right? And so like I'm like you, once we have the copy and the words for the website set in place, it's 2 weeks. We launch in 2 weeks. And for the agile business, it's like, I need to like start getting customers. I need to start building this thing up now. That's also another huge draw.
Absolutely.
And all right, so we need to talk about this because I think that this doesn't get talked about enough. So say somebody comes to you and they're like, Christy Price, I love your style. I want you to create my website. Like, I've seen your blog post. I'm ready. Let's do this thing. And so you create a beautiful website for them, right? It looks good. It represents, it's clear, it's simple. When people type in their business, it populates on search engines for their keyword, for their particular brand name. But what they're also noticing is that they're looking in their Google Analytics and they're noticing a ton of people aren't coming to their website, right? Like they're not getting any traffic. Like nobody is typing in related things to their product and service and their website's coming up. So what's the problem here, and what can these solopreneurs or small businesses do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we like to say is your website isn't Field of Dreams. It's not you build it and they will come. And as you mentioned, you can launch a website and have some SEO around the specific business name, or if it's a very specific what they do and they can show up in search results. But more often than not, that's not something that just magically happens. So there is a ton that goes into SEO and having your site show up when somebody types in a related word to what you do. And some of the things that you can do are getting backlinks for your site. So you can reach out to other people in other industries that are related to yours. You can do guest blog posts. You can make sure and put your URL on your social media. You can also set up a Google My Business page and be active there. That's very helpful for SEO, especially local SEO. And the best thing that you can do is create frequent, relevant content. So that's something, Clint, that you and I have talked about in the past, and something that we both love doing is creating content. We both have blogs where we have worked to create useful content for people. So when someone Googles, and on my blog, if someone Googles, how do I create a drop-down menu on Squarespace, my site shows up in the first page or two of Google results because I have a blog post on that. And because I have created this sort of pillar content where these different posts are connected together, I link one post to another post that's getting traffic. I'm kind of creating this network of traffic within my site that Google recognizes, and then it causes all of that content to kind of be elevated in terms of search results. So really creating, and I know you're all about this, creating good content is really the best way to elevate your search engine optimization for your website.
When we think about content, like this is a school of content podcast. Content is a lot of things, right? Like a web design is content, podcast or content, videos are content, blogs are content, all of these things, social media posts are content. But one of the things that's specific about this is actually putting words on the page, because for a lot of key phrases, your website will pop, Squarespace web design key phrases, ChristyPrice.com will pop up, right? And you've created content around it. And here's something that I'm hoping you can tease out for the people who are watching or listening to this. It's a lot of the content that you're doing is how-to stuff, right? Like stuff where people can do it on their own if they want to. And some people might think to themselves, why should I create content so that people can do stuff on their own when my business revolves around me doing stuff for them?
Absolutely. So when you're creating content, and we'll specifically talk about for your blog. So I do create some content on social media, but I spend more time creating content for my blog because that is a place where I can control my content. On social media, I can't control what's showing up. There are algorithms that have that in place. On my website, I can put my most popular blog posts on my homepage. So if somebody lands there, they're seeing my most popular blog posts, and one of those might pull them in. So I have a lot more control over the content on my own site and how it's showing up. And in terms of creating how-to content, like why would you do that if you want to sell a service? By creating content and teaching people how to do something, you are positioning yourself as an expert in that field. So when someone has Googled, how do I do this thing on Squarespace? And they read my blog post, they watch the video on how to do it, they've done it themselves. Christy Price kind of sticks in their mind as she knew how to do that. So perhaps she knows other things. One thing that I also do for my blog is that I have a pop-up for my lead magnet. So if someone is visiting my blog, they see a pop-up to sign up for a lead magnet, which is a Squarespace pre-launch checklist. And I get a lot of people signing up for my email list because they've seen my blog, they found something valuable there. They want to know what they need to make sure is on their site before they launch. So they want this checklist. And then once they get the checklist, I enroll them in a welcome sequence. So over the course of a couple of weeks, they'll get some useful emails from me on things that they may not know about Squarespace. Like there is an email about 5 secret, tricks in Squarespace that you may not know about, secret shortcuts. There is a webinar that I did on how to add your own lead magnet that they can access through that welcome sequence. So it really is more about education and positioning myself as an expert. And, we talked earlier about just it's fun teaching people how to do things like that kind of education post. It's something that I enjoy doing. If it wasn't, I probably wouldn't write them as much, but I love breaking things down and explaining how to do something. And just, the comments that I get from people who send these emails is like, I was trying to do this for a week and then I found your post. It's really nice. It's fulfilling in that way. But also, because you're creating this content that people are searching for, they're looking for, how do I create a drop-down menu on Squarespace? Because you're creating that content that they're searching for, that's why you're going to show up in SEO. You're going to show up on the first or second page of Google search results if you've created this body of helpful content that people are finding useful, and they're going to keep coming back to your blog, and that's going to help your SEO. So for me, those how-to posts are important to get people to my site initially and to hopefully get them to sign up for my lead magnet.
Some of the things I hear you saying that are important is like, hey, the words actually need to be on the page. Like, video is cool. Nobody loves video more than me. I'm doing video all the time. If you look on my social media, you're going to see a ton of video. If you look on my YouTube channel, obviously it's a bunch of video. But what video cannot do is video cannot add keyword-rich text to your website so that when people type something into search engines, it pops up. It's not as common, right? But you can have a ton of semantically, which means the words that people say, related words on a blog post on a given topic, which just makes it much more keyword friendly. And then if you combine both of those, hey, video and text, now we're kind of like doing something really interesting. We can keep people on the page longer. We can get more people for search engines, that kind of stuff. So that's like one thing is like, hey, the words actually need to be on the page. The other thing I heard you say is you're positioning yourself as the expert. One of the things that Christy told me in another discussion that we had is like, she had a job where she was helping people with Squarespace stuff, right? In which people had queries and they were like, how do I do this? And she was able to get these questions ahead of time so that she was able to formulate a response. And one of the things that this did was it helped her to learn the platform and to learn these things, that questions that people are always asking. And it also got her in the habit of actually creating stuff that's useful to position herself as an expert, right? Like, I know the problems that people have. And when people know that you understand their problems and that you can help them with one problem, they're more likely to trust you for a more complicated or unique solution. Here's what I mean. Oftentimes people will be like, yo, Clint, I'm thinking about getting into video. What should I do? Right? And so I could tell this person, hey, like, here's the camera you need, here's the microphone you need, whatever. I can give them like the software I use, and that stuff's cool. Or I can create a piece of content around it and direct people to that. Now, what most of the time what happens with this is that what they want me to do is to tell them a camera, to tell them a software, and to tell them like, you know, here's like what you do. But when I show them the entire process of like how I light things and how I make things sound and how I edit and how I use jump cuts and B-roll and animations and how I script out a video and how I structure things and how I find the keyword topics in YouTube and how I use the hashtags in the title and how I use the description box and how I create the thumbnail and how I do this, they're realizing that this is a much more complicated project than they originally thought. And throughout that process, when they're able to see how complicated it can be, especially on like a complete tutorial, they're like, nah, fuck this. I'm just gonna like let this person do that. Because obviously they know what they're doing and I don't got time for that. But at least I know that they know. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense, because I think that a lot of times when people land on the solution to a problem that they're having, not only are they finding that particular answer, but they're beginning to realize how much they don't know. And that's when, like you said, they'll reach out to an expert to just take care of things the right way from the beginning. And another thing that you touched on was like using your blog content to save you time and solve problems. So one of the questions that I get a lot from people who are exploring maybe having me build a website, they don't understand a visual identity. And so they think that's part of a website. So they think perhaps the brand comes with the website. And so that's education that I always have to do. It's like, well, your brand is something that's separate from the website, you know, and part of that is your visual identity. So you'll need a logo, and you'll probably need 2 versions, and you need a color palette. And I recently wrote a blog post that walks people through what is branding, what is visual identity, what does your web designer need from you? Because that's a conversation I was having over and over and over. And now when someone reaches out with a question about branding, I can just send them to that post that answers everything, and they'll understand really the depth of what a visual identity is and that it's separate from a web design.
Yeah, or the copy that's written on the website, right? Like, no, like your web designer doesn't know your business like you know your business. And so either you or a copywriter actually have to go through that, or the keywords that are related to your product or service. That takes some research, right? So, you know, let's talk about 2 things, and I have some quick questions. I want to honor your time. I feel like I could just talk to you forever. One is that Christy's a great blogger. Like I mentioned earlier, I read her stuff, and I actually like read her stuff. And she has a whole course on her website on how to make money with your blog, right? How to like that process of creating content, writing the content, and how to actually make that work for your business and all the different ways that you can monetize. So there's that, right? I have complete video tutorials on how to do things with Squarespace. And by the way, Christy also has a ton of free content on all of this same stuff, right? Like her blog is just like, I've used her blog to be able to figure out a lot of things on Squarespace when I didn't know the answer, which is how I first came across her in the first place, right? And so I also have a ton of video tutorials on how to create a website, a Squarespace website for free. And all of that to say, that stuff only helps to save time. It only helps to make more money. It only helps to build goodwill. It only helps to like actually add value to the people that you're working with, right? So one, I wanted to make sure that I dropped, hey, like if you're like listening to what Chrissy's saying about blogging and creating content and you're like, I want more of this, make sure that you go and you check out her course because it's worth it. It's going to help you. Also, if you're more of like a video person, she has a YouTube channel too, but I also have like a ton of like really in-depth how-to things so that you could do those things yourself. I have a few qualifying questions that I wanted to make sure that are unique to this podcast. One of them is, this is a School of Content podcast, so we like to have a play on the whole school thing. So first, I just want to know personally, were you like a good student growing up, or were you the rebel kid? I have my own assumptions, but I want to hear it from you.
Yeah, I was my high school valedictorian. So it was, I was the goody two shoes kid who studied and did all her work. And then I went to college and I realized that skipping class was really fun. So in college, I kind of explored more of that, not quite as studious side, but ended up going to grad school.
You were the kid that I would probably cheat off of in high school on a test. I could see that. And like the other thing about this is, the thing about detention, obviously you didn't spend a whole lot of time in detention. I did, but we like to talk about like content marketing detention.
Yeah, I see this, I think I mentioned this to you in an earlier conversation. One of the things with email marketing that I'm seeing is this huge push to make multiple six figures if I take someone's course. And there's a lot of just push to scale and push to, earn tons of money by taking someone's course. And very often those courses are incredibly expensive. And so you see people shelling out thousands of dollars when they really could just start with those free resources. Like your YouTube channel is a great place to start if you don't have those thousands of dollars to shell out. So I think for me, it really is, there's been a lot of content recently about, and it's the sales content that just feels icky to me.
Yeah, like, hey, can you just help somebody, please? Can you just help somebody without your... I'm creating this video right now as we speak for an article in Orbit Media. And I wanted to create a video that people could bookmark and send to people on LinkedIn and other platforms that just want to connect with them and then immediately ask for the sale, right? Who get into people's DMs, and I was thinking like that's not something you would ever do at an actual party, right? Like you would never be at a social networking event or a party and be like, hey, nice to meet you. Have you thought about using video marketing to increase your inbound leads to gain more revenue? Right? Like you would never do that. That shit would never fly. But people, because they're on social media, that's the first thing they do. So I'm like, oh, like really cool. Like I'm glad you requested to be a connection. And then you immediately send me this message. I'm like, oh, bro. But now, I got a video for you. I might link it up here on the YouTube thing so that you can send it to people and be like, teach them some social media marketing manners.
I love that. And that's actually something in my blog so I do affiliate marketing in my blog. So if there is a product or a service that I found useful, I will mention it. But it's so funny. I'll go to other Squarespace designers, and I won't call anybody out by name, but there are other designers out there who have like tons of ads that are not related to what we do, or, affiliate marketing for, a nutrition box or something that's completely unrelated. And that's something that I talk about in the Make Money with Your Blog course as well. It's, you don't want to be icky. You don't want to be sleazy.
This next question is a little embarrassing for me. So I hope, I hope you can answer it with some grace. But when it comes to Squarespace web design, you're somebody who I've been reading, who I've been following, who's had a big impact on me, who's inspired me to go out here and to create websites myself. I was wondering if I can get this question answered here on the podcast. Will you be my Squarespace web design mentor? Will you be the person can you take me under your wing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be buddies. Yeah, absolutely. We'll be Squarespace buddies for sure. I know there's so much I can learn from you about content marketing as well.
Awesome. Well, it's on the air now. It's it's written in digital ink. I really appreciate it. Like I said, there's just so much about. I would hate for this to be like a conversation that we don't get to continue, right? And then following up on that. So first of all, thank you, because that means the world to me. And then closing up, when we're thinking about Squarespace web design, or when we're thinking about this whole website thing in general and creating your own website, can you think of 1 to 3 people who would be it would be worth reaching out to them to get their perspective on this topic? Like people who would be interesting, who might have a different point of view, but would be worth getting their perspective.
Yeah, in terms of Squarespace design, website design in general. So I think Sarah Moon is really, she has pivoted her business to focus on movement marketing. She does Squarespace web design, and she has an agency. So her perspective is different than mine, because she comes at it from an agency perspective. But also this recent pivot to movement marketing is really interesting to me. So I think Sarah Moon would be a great person to, she has some free courses too. So somebody that's interesting to dive into her content. And I think that someone who has a really interesting service offering is Eleanor Mehrhofer, and she is an expat based in Germany, and she does one-day Squarespace designs. And so I love that her business is focused on this specific offering. So she is looking for a specific kind of client, and she has an amazing result that is, a really quick turnaround, a competitive price point. So just in terms of the different kinds of services you can provide as a Squarespace designer, I think Eleanor does a really good job at this particular type of service that's interesting. So Eleanor, and she has some great content for around searching for keywords and other content related to DIY stuff as well. So Eleanor is worth checking out. And then let's think, off the top of my head, if you are a DIYer and you want to learn how to do Squarespace yourself, Kirsten Martin has a great course on getting started with Squarespace. So if you are looking to DIY, her course is at a really good price point. It's not inflated like a lot of courses you see these days. So it walks you through building a Squarespace website. And then I will say one other person, if you are looking to grow your custom code skills and learn some CSS, Will Myers has an amazing CSS course that is fantastic for teaching you just how to get started with custom coding. And he also has a lot of fantastic Squarespace plugins, some of which I use on almost all my designs.
What a valid Victorian answer, just going above and beyond. It's always the A+. I get it. Closing up, where can people go to learn more? I've already mentioned this 100 times, but where can people go to learn more about you and all of the awesome work that you do?
Yeah, please visit me at christyprice.com. It's ChristyPrice.com. I'm sure you'll drop a link, Clint. And on my website, I do Squarespace web design, custom design. I also sell Squarespace premium templates. So for DIYers that want that strategy baked in that we talked about, those are for you. And you mentioned my blogging course, Make Money with Your Blog. So you learn how to position yourself as an expert and to make more money.
Can't recommend that enough. All of her stuff is awesome. You're going to get a ton of value and just at an amazing price point. So make sure that you check that out. So Christy, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you, Clint. It is my pleasure. I always love talking with you.
As Christy mentioned, you will find links to all of the stuff in the description box and in the show notes below, to her website, to her courses, to her web designs, and to even some of the helpful resources that she talked about from other designers who are in this space. Listen, guys, you can do this whole content marketing web design thing, whether you're doing it for yourself or you're ready to take the investment to actually get a website created for you. You can do this. And this podcast is here to help. Cool. So until the next episode, class dismissed.